85% of San Marcos's water comes from here, Canyon Lake. The other 15% comes from the Edwards Aquifer and surrounding bodies of water. I talked to Rachel Sanborn, member of the Water Foundation and self-proclaimed river ranger, to figure out the student and community impact of the river and its effect long term.
For our purposes, the reason we started was because of problems at Canyon Lake, as a matter of fact. That when there were subdivisions that were going in below Canyon Lake, in this, I guess it was in the late 70s and 80s, the people who lived along the river realized that the water didn't look the same, which is one of those kind of funny things. People go, oh, it doesn't look the same. And so it looked more cloudy to them, is primarily what it was. And they went to the local officials and to the subdivision builders and said, something's happened, you've done something, it's not, the water's not clear anymore. And they're like, well, do you have proof? And of course they didn't, you know. And it was a heads up to us in San Marcos, because we knew the growth was coming up the corridor from both directions, that we were going to get it eventually. It was a heads up to us that if we wanted to be able to prove things, we better have the data ourselves. We cannot rely on the state or the federal government that comes in periodically to test waterways and things like that to do it, particularly on small creeks and streams and things like that. That we really needed to have the data ourselves and be the ones to be studying it so that we could see changes happen. And particularly on the San Marcos River, because it's so unique in the sense it has all these endangered species in the aquifer, it has endangered species in the river. It's a crystal clear water. You don't want to mess with that. It's already pretty good now, but you don't want anything to change that. And all it takes is, for example, a big ranch downstream selling out and putting in a huge subdivision. Water quality could change drastically. The River Foundation stands by the policy that you should have big green spaces on either side. And the Woods Apartments was a major conflict, and literally city council members were not re-elected because of their stand on the Woods Apartments in particular. If you weren't aware, the Woods Apartments actually, before it was there, it was a camp. It was called Capes Camp, and it was like a recreational place you could go and stay overnight or rent stuff like that. So it was a great big huge green space, and when they sold it, there was a lot of people wanted to be part of the city park system, which would have been incredible. You know, we literally could have linked all the parks from Sewell Park all the way across the highway. And we pushed very hard for that to be part of the flood control thing, that makes sure that that area, that the water had some place to go. It was voted down, the woods was built, and within 9 months, while they were in the building process, we were hit with a huge flood, and that building acted like a levee. And it basically, the water that normally ran straight from these neighborhoods and the Blanco into the river was backed up into all the neighborhoods. So we were very angry, and that so not only did it happen once, but it happened again, 4 months later. And so we're not going to make those kinds of mistakes again. And I think people have kind of learned their lessons that the economic cost of that is significant, to have that kind of problem going on and cause that kind of damage to the neighborhood was a major thing. But this river wasn't always clean. There was a period when it was kind of in the 1940s and the 50s, basically, and up into the 60s, that everything ran into this river. All the stuff on the roads, sewage, everything went into them. We had lots of leaky pipes. It was just, and there was a lot of growth going on, and the river was considered actually unsafe to swim in town, which is hard to believe now, because you can't believe that City Park, for example, in the middle of it would be declared unsafe. But if you talk to people who grew up in that time period, most of them didn't swim in the river. It was considered like where you got earaches, eye infections, stomach problems, all that kind of stuff, because there was so much stuff in it. Granted, in that time period, we have really, really cleaned it up a lot. And as far as the River Foundation's goal, we've really focused from the very beginning, from the headwaters, and just tried to push that level of water quality improvements all the way down, so that now past the highway, it's pretty clear. And when you get past the sewage treatment plant, which is on the edge of town, the water's still fairly good. Now, when the Blanco comes into the San Marcos, that's when things start to get much worse. There's much more cloudy water, there's a lot more sediment in the water, and things like that.